Certainly, we've never had that before in an IPSASB meeting. I'm looking forward to going and getting my photo taken. But anyway, um, so in terms of today, thank you very much, everyone, for starting early. I think that's important that, we respect, the fact that we need to finish early from a point of view of the staff here, and also just in terms of balancing it, what we're going to do is slightly change the agenda because we do have João joining us to talk about the handbook, and in order to make it a little more sociable for him, we're going to bring the handbook item up first on the agenda, because I think it's midnight in Toronto, and it stops João having to wait up until even later in the night to present on the handbook. So I'm just wondering if he's actually online. Ah, welcome, João.
Thank you. Good morning.
So, João, over to you on the handbook, and thanks for staying up for us.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share the screen. Is it visible, my presentation?
It's coming up still. Give us a couple of seconds. Now we can see it, João.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. Yes, so now we are in agenda item 13. Staff thought it would be worthwhile to do a brief handbook update. So it won't take longer. So I'll have only 2 slides. And so we finally got the publication of the 2024 IPSASB handbook by the end of November. So which includes 7 new pronouncements. 6 of them are numbered IPSAS, and along with the consequential amendments to other standards. So it was kind of a big milestone for the board and staff to get these published still this year. So as you will be noticing, we didn't just replicate the previous handbooks. So we did quite a thorough work in terms of enhancing the new IFAC and IFRS Foundation trademarks, guidelines, signposting throughout the 2024 IPSASB handbook. So I just highlight 2 of them. So we now refer to IPSAS not as a noun but as an adjective. So, and together with the IPSAS standards or IPSAS issues papers. And prominently we'll put the R at least at the beginning of each document, in this case right at the beginning of the handbook. And the second one will be removing the small s for plural when referring to IPSAS and IFRSs. And of course, this is consistent with also with IFRS Foundation trademarks. And so now both international standard setters have similar trademark guidelines when referring to their own standards. So we now have a new process to produce the IPSASB handbook. I'm not going to go into the details of how that process goes. It's quite boring, actually, for the board. What I want to highlight is that the benefits of that new process. So right now, the IPSASB staff has more control of the process in terms of project management and also actioning the changes into the handbook. which we hadn't before because we changed the software that we use to produce the handbook. Leads to a faster production, and it's more reliable in terms of error prevention, in terms of formatting and of the handbook. With this, I can say that we are expecting to kickstart the production of the 2025 IPSASB handbook in first quarter of 2025, just like we have before we did the change with 2024 handbook. So it's good news that I wanted to convey to the board with the publication of 2024 IPSASB handbook, which has close to 3,000 pages. And the good news also going forward, because we will be, return back to normal in terms of starting the process to produce the handbooks going forward. And that's all from my end. Thanks for your attention, and I'll hand over to you, Ian, in case the board wants to provide any comment.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks. I just wanted to publicly thank João for his role over many, many years doing the handbook. It's a pretty thankless job and the task. It can be tedious, takes a lot of time. It's very detailed, and João does it very well. But and everyone on the team relies on the person who does the handbook as one of the key resources in the team to understand how to structure standards, how to integrate the material into the standards. And João brings a wealth of knowledge. And without getting into the details, as João said, it would bore you to death if we told you about the change in the process. But now that we have a different system, we're kind of going back to the old way of doing it. We do have better control. It helps with the speed of translations, in that we'll have the material. One of the issues with the old way is was difficult to export the files to do translation, so that was a bit of a barrier. And I'm very happy that we have this new process. That's why I asked João to give a short update to the board, because we did have a gap for 1 year in the handbook. And I think it's really important that we get the handbook out in a timely fashion. The handbook is important for constituents to be able to apply the standards, but it's also a control over our standard setting process when we put the standards in the handbook and we link everything up with the amendments to other IPSAs. So very detailed and technical task, can be a little thankless. You know, João does it behind the scenes, and I really wanted the board and our constituents to understand that we now have a new process. João's doing a great job, and we have the new process because of João. He stepped up in the middle of the summer when it was looking like we might not get a 2024 handbook, and he took it upon himself to do a lot of the rebuilding of the files to get them back in the format we need. So I'm really grateful for João's contributions, and I'm happy that you'll be getting a handbook for 2025 much earlier in the year because of the new process. So with that, I'll be quiet now and pass it over to others.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we do owe João a huge debt in terms of that hard work, because the handbook is the output from the whole process. And as you say, it's a very important control. David.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I would echo the thanks to João for what, as Ross says, is a totally thankless task. And I too am extremely pleased to note that the 25 handbook will be available at the beginning of 25 rather than towards the end. However, I think there might be a couple of glitches that João might need to sort out, because I have just logged into IPSASB. I clicked on standards and pronouncements, and what do I see? The 2022 handbook. If I want to see the 24 handbook, it seems to want to take me to LinkedIn. So I don't know how many people who are using our handbook would be members of LinkedIn. I certainly am not. So I can't see online the 2024 handbook. So perhaps there are one or two little things that need to be resolved. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. We'll make sure the links are updated appropriately. It is on the landing page, but you're right. When you go to the standards, it's showing 2022 first.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, interestingly, actually, just while sitting here, I actually clicked on the IPSASB logo on the landing page, and that actually refreshed the page. And whereas I was getting the 2022 handbook, it's now showing the 2024 handbook. So it may just be as simple as just doing that. Literally, I just clicked on the logo at the top left-hand corner of the website, and it sorted it. Claudia.
Thank you. And thank you, Joe, that we have at least now handbooks back, actual handbooks. If this handbook only virtual available, or is there maybe from next year on also possible to request also a printed version by some organization or whatever?
So IFAC has moved to using a vendor to get printed handbooks. So the intention will be you'll be able to buy it through a link they'll put on the website, like you could the 2022 handbook. But now we've got a handbook. Now they're working with that vendor to get it in that printed form. But yeah, IFAC doesn't print its own handbooks and distribute them anymore. It made the decision, I think, back in 2020 to move away from that. And they organize and distribute our IP and our material. So, and actually, we did follow up on this and asked how many people had bought the 2022 handbook with the previous link. And we sold in the 25 months the 2022 handbook was up, all of 3 versions of that handbook. So we're not prioritizing the printed handbooks in much of a way anymore. IFAC's looking into some different platforms to better utilize the PDF versions and an e-reader to do that, and still continuing to consider how EIS will continue to evolve with after some glitches in keeping that as a ongoing process. It's quite manual and quite difficult. But it's one of the long-term focuses for IFAC is to have a much more stable e-platform to be able to use the handbooks, because from our information we've gathered on the website, it's the way that people modernly are accessing the handbook. So the PDFs get lots of downloads, EIS still gets lots of hits, but 3 printed handbooks from the vendor. It doesn't cost IFAC anything to use the vendor, but it does take time to get the files ready so they can give it to the vendor to be distributed.
Thanks, Ross. Any other points on that? Okay, that's good. Well, it is fantastic to have all those problems hopefully behind us now, Joao. So once again, thank you for going through that process. And it was ironic that it all came to a head at the point in time that we'd actually approved, a whole bunch of new standards. So if nothing else, now I don't have to have all the separate files on my Surface Pro. I'm going to download the 2024 handbooks today. Thank you very much, Joao, and we'll let you get to bed now. So thanks, Joao, and
Thank
see
you.
you in the new year.
See you.
Okay, so now we move back up onto the agenda, and we're moving on to item 11 in terms of maintenance activities, talking about the application panel and post-implementation review process. So just give Edwin a moment to get set up, and then we'll go straight into that item.
Thank you, Ian. So we're going to talk about post-implementation reviews and the application panel for the next hour or so. And we've already talked about these topics back in September of this year and also September of 2023. So this session will mostly focus on the planned rollout of these 2 activities, and also we will go through a page flip to capture any comments from board members. So starting with post-implementation reviews, The staff's plan is to finalize the operating procedures, which are attached to the appendix of agenda item 11.2.1. And we'll go through a page flip in a bit to capture any comments. And then we're proposing to start rolling out this process for selecting a standard in March of next year. Okay. And that this first post-implementation review will largely be a test run. So we will plan to select a very limited standard. We haven't really decided on which one yet. And then if approved by the board in March, the plan is to issue an RFI in June of next year to circulate, I guess, ask constituents for their views on what the issues are with the standard that we've selected. And then assuming that goes as planned, the plan is to analyze the responses from constituents in the second half of next year and to issue our report before, hopefully before the first half of 2026. Okay. So I guess before I go into that, I'll pause here first and then ask members what they think about this timeline.
Andrew.
Thanks. Just in terms of putting out our first RFI in the second half of next year, I do think it's a little bit ambitious to do it. I think it's something that's quite new to us as a board and a staff to go through the process. So we're not sure what necessarily may come up during that period. And I guess we've also got to start research on whatever standard we're going to pick. So we've got to pick a standard, do research. Plus, there's a lot of uncertainty. So I do just have some concern about that second half of next year.
Well, I think, let's just say this is an indicative time frame. I think we can over-engineer this, frankly. We are going to learn as we go through the process. And particularly if we're picking one standard, then it may be a lot easier, actually. I think, we've used the RFI approach before in terms of leases. So, I think the most important thing is we get stuck into this now. We've talked about it several times already. So, I think let's just treat that as an indicative timetable and let the staff get on with it. Ross.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, similar to Ian, but I just wanted to highlight that, this is the timeline now. We've talked about this in the staff about a prototype standard of some sort, just to go through the process and see how it works before we kind of commit to a larger work program of how we go through everything. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to get so that we're all of a sudden so busy doing PIRs we don't have anything else, but it's more a test of the process and make sure that it's working as these operating procedures designed, and that we've been through the process before we ask on the bigger suite of standards how we're going to work through them. So this is more, I think, what we're thinking here, rather than that once a quarter we've got an RFI going out. We're not trying to overload the work program.
So I think, if we say that's the indicative timetable, if it takes, another meeting to get it right, or we need to finalize it through, the check-in meeting or something like that, then let's allow ourselves that space. Because I take your point, Andrew. I think, we want to go out with a good first attempt, but equally, I think let's, the phrase, let's not let the best be the enemy of the good. Angela.
Good morning. Good morning. And just to note, I do share Andrew's concerns, but I also hear the explanation. I guess one of the things that might help is which standard that you choose. Obviously, some might be harder than others. So, and I note that we haven't selected the project. Just one suggestion, and this is without even thinking. very hard about which standards you would start with. I did wonder whether the segment reporting standard should be considered in a post-implementation review, partly to support the work we're doing in the financial presentation statement project. Just a thought.
Thanks, Angela. I mean, Ross, do you want to just pick that one up?
So what our plan was, and maybe Edwin can jump in, I think the plan is we'll bring back some ideas on this in March when we've kind of thought it through. So we'll note post segment as one of the topics, but I don't think we want to have a discussion today about which ones we would do first before staff have the time to go through and have a think about it. And again, take forward the thinking here on how, what we want to test through the prototype standard. So I really can't comment one way or the other without setting back and really thinking it through.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will also need to get some, as we've discussed elsewhere in the meeting, it'll be useful to get some input from national standard setters in terms of which standards are being used at the moment and where they're being adapted and so on. And inevitably that will also inform the decisions, because otherwise we'll end up in a situation that, we get a bidding war between members in terms of, well, I like this standard, I like that standard. So I think let staff go away and actually collect the information, but also, and this goes back to piloting the process, actually, it's probably quite important that we pick up the right standard from a point of view of just actually getting the process moving. I think let them bring back the recommendations when they've had a chance to think about all of this. Lynn.
Thanks. Thanks, Edwin, for the papers. I thought they were really clear. Just a couple of points, and I think it links back to this standard selection process, but I do think there is always we're managing expectations about the workload that staff can take on. And I just wondered in the papers when it talks about the standards to be selected, you've got quite a kind of like broad set of criteria, but actually I wondered if there was some refinement you could do around kind of like the guidelines for which standards to select, because it does strike me slightly linked to Angela's comment perhaps, but if you are selecting standards where you can feed the output into an existing program of work that you've already got in the work program, that is a more manageable kind of like consequence of that. Otherwise, you could continually be adding to your work program, and I'm not sure when I sort of look at Ross's report and the availability of staff, how are you going to manage the output of this? And so I wonder when you're ranking which ones to choose to do, that you might potentially want to give a weighting in that decision making to standards that could feed into current projects that you've already got in the work program. That might be a criteria you might want to think about as part of that standard selection process, rather than standards that would involve an entirely new project of work. So that was my first comment. And then my second was just managing expectations about how many of these you're going to do. Is it one a year? Is it 5 a year? So perhaps some clarity when you go out to sort of communicate this about just how many you're expecting to do each year as well. I didn't think that was entirely clear to me. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn. Ross, do you want to come back on those points?
Yeah, I think it's good urging and things we do need to think about. So we've been focusing on how the process should work and getting that right. We do need to think now about how we're going to work through the standards, what the plan is, how many, RFIs on post-implementation reviews you have, how many projects you can take on, and how that fits together. I think part of the answer will come through the work program consultation after we kind of scope it out a little bit more on what it's going to look like and the pace. Because I think we would want, when we go out with a broad work program consultation, some work coming through post-implementation reviews, some set standard setting projects, some IFRS alignment and sustainability. So I think we've got groups there, but mapping out how all those fit together and what the resources are, that's the activity we haven't done yet. We will do that in the coming months as we work on the work program and as we finalize how this will roll out in 2025 and beyond.
Thanks, Ross. I mean, I think, so, you know, in terms of the specific, what I'd suggest is that we just add an additional E to paragraph 5, which just, you know, logs that a consideration may be, you know, an upcoming standards project where, you know, that will be a useful foundation. So we can just, if we leave the staff to just add that additional point there. So Patricia, next.
Thank you. My question is about the input for the process. How to identify the countries, organizations that have implemented some standards to include or not in the maintenance activities, because I think there is a risk. For example, if a question is raised by one entity or entities with specific characteristics, maybe change the standards and can create another problem for the other jurisdictions. I would like to understand better how to identify these standards that is in the scope of the review. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Edwin. I mean, I think, frankly, this process is going to evolve and we will learn how to handle it. And you know, certain entities will be more impacted by standards than others. And I think, you know, part of it will also be informed by what we hear coming back from constituents through the various different channels. So, you know, likely we will start out with an initial program and then we will need to flex that, and there may be something that says, right, okay, there's something coming up here where actually there's an opportunity to get more information in a more structured way. I don't think we should tie ourselves down to anything at the moment. Ross, and then I'm going to go to, you know, I think we've got enough in there at the moment, and then we just need to operate the process, frankly.
So I'll answer first, but I do want to give Edwin a chance to speak as someone who's done the most thinking on this. But maybe I'll start with thinking about your concern that we might make changes that have unintended consequences for those. So a post-implementation review, when it starts, is simply a survey of anyone who's interested to share their views on specific questions the board will develop related to an existing standard, or we'll ask questions. So the board will spend time in open meetings developing the request for information that will have specific questions about an existing standard and its application. Then we'll do a normal consultation like we do for any project. We'll do a normal consultation period of 120 days. So anybody who sends us input on that request for information, the staff will analyze, we'll work through all of the issues we hear, and then the board will take a decision based on the analysis on whether there is something coming from that request for information that requires the board to consider either amendments to existing standards through a minor project or even a major project. At that point, you start standard setting and we go through our normal due process. So any changes to the standards would still require an exposure draft, public consultation, deliberation of the comments, and finalization of the changes. So there's, if anything, you're adding a lens on the front end of the standard setting process that requires you to respond to what you hear from constituents before even initiating the standard setting. So it's actually more of a check on the board that the board's not self-selecting its own implementation changes to the standards. It's actually polling the public to understand how the standards are being used and if they're operating as designed. So it's an actual enhancement to our process today to ensure you're getting more public input on the nature of the standard setting projects to update existing standards. And then, but again, you're not taking any shortcuts on our current due process. So I have zero concerns that we're going to make changes that have unintended consequences, because our constituents always take serious that we have a consultation, we put it out there, and we do it all in the public and in the open. So, and again, we're building our process off of the processes of others who've been operating post-implementation reviews for a number of years.
So I think all of that actually that you've just summarised there, Ross, I think that shows how we need to communicate this when we go out with that first RFI, that we need to position it very carefully to avoid that, this is standard setting. No, it's not. It's actually that. I like the, this is an additional lens, and it's right up front in the process. So I'm not sure whether it's Claudia or Abdullah first. Sorry, Edwin, did you want to add anything? No. Okay. So Claudia, do you want to go first? Then I'll go to Abdullah, and then I'll bring Fabienne in.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could make an adding or clarification at the standard selection process. We have added something that we will consider adaptation by national standard setters. Maybe we should also include the endorsement process. In a few countries, they don't use national standard setters. They directly apply IPSASB. Maybe they have an endorsement process where they say, but excluding X standard. So maybe it's also worth to consider this in the selection process and not only go to national standards.
Okay, so we just need to perhaps just tweak the wording in 5 Part D, because I think that is sort of, if I read that, you can sort of, but it's just making that more explicit, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. I think there's also sort of, it's got adoption and adaptation as well. So okay, so we'll let the staff go away and just make those clarifications. Abdullah.
Thank you, Chair. And this is building up on what Ross was saying. This is an enhancement to our work, and this is for us to get more reach. And ISB established that, and nothing has caused any disruption in implementing or in the due process for their standards. So I think this is something that we introduced with our strategy. We need to just build on it, and would give us more a tool for enhancing our communication and hearing from our constituent. That is one. Second, I would be more keen onto the selection process itself rather than the exact standards that is going to be there. So once we are comfortable with the process and the selection criteria, then whatever standard is there is whatever being selected through the criteria. The last point is about the piloting. Why don't we let the piloting not to discuss further, and instead just hearing from staff, recommendation from the group that's gonna be there, and see what comes out, because this is a piloting, and this is our first touch base with the process itself. But a tip on that, we don't want to go into controversial standards, because I'm not saying that we go with easy standards, but we go with something that can give us an overview of the process and what we should be expect out of the process. Thank you.
Anyone? Okay.
I would agree with all those points. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we're going to do a page flip in a moment, and I think then basically in terms of finalization, staff will take that away and action the edits. And I think then what we need to do is actually at that point in time, we finish tinkering with the wording, and we just get on and do it at that point in time, because I think we can kind of keep on trying to refine and refine and refine. And the important thing is actually going to be that we get on and do this, and we can come back and review these, the process at a point in time. But I think the important thing is going to be that we actually get out there and we action this and then see how it works in practice. Fabienne next, and then I've got Angela and then Lucy.
Thank you, Jan. I thought it would be a good time now to bring the comments the CAG made on Monday. So in general, the CAG members were supportive of the operating procedure of the PIR review, and also with the proposed involvement of the CAG within the process. More specifically, CAG members expressed they actually sought clarifications on the proposed timeline for starting the reviews, as well as on the time frame for conducting the reviews. Also, they asked clarifications on the criteria for selecting the standards that would go through the PIR process, and the evaluation of the process, and then how the progress and findings of a specific review would be communicated to the public. They also advised that when reviewing IFRS-aligned IPSASs, that the board might consider making sure that application of the private sector principles to the public sector was relevant and in the public interest, and not to look only at the appropriateness of the public sector adaptations. So that's it from me for the PIR.
Thanks, Fabienne. So Angela and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. One of the benefits of the RFI being approved in June is it's a reasonable period before the public sector, the National Standard Setter forum in September in Portugal. And I just wondered whether the staff had started to perhaps think about, in terms of managing expectations of national standard setters and others that endorse, whether there was an opportunity to weave that or have that on the agenda for that forum.
Ross. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Angela. I don't think if we publish an RFI in June, it'll likely go out in July. I don't think we'd have the feedback from the first RFI for the Standard Setters Forum, but what we would intend to discuss is the program of how we're going to go through existing standards and what our priorities might be, because the main focus for that Standard Setters Forum will be development and ultimate approval of the work program consultation, and I expect the maintenance activities to be an important part of that. So I could see us having at least a few sessions on the maintenance activities, and I would think getting feedback from our constituents and national standard setters in particular on their priorities on things they want us to prioritize for post-implementation reviews would be an excellent use of time in the Standard Setters Forum.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Inevitably, there's the variety of different factors in terms of the selection of projects going forwards, and that's going to be influenced, by what the actual main projects are and all of that kind of thing. I mean, it may be if we got an RFI out beforehand, though, that would actually make it more tangible for the national standard setters attending the forum, and that might well be quite helpful, so that it becomes an actual exercise, even although we won't have the results to hand and so on. Lucy, and then Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I think if there could also be a value to look at the International Public Sector Financial Accountability Index in identifying which standard to be subjected to PIR. Because I look at the data of the 2021 index, and out of the 49 which are implementing the accrual basis. There are 8 which are implementing IPSAS, but they modify it to suit their local context. And that is 16%, around 16%. So I moved to the 2025 projection, and out of the 83 that would implement accrual basis, there are 16 that would, implement IPSAS with modification, and the rate increased to 19%. Going to the 2030 projection of 120 implementers, 27 of them intend to implement IPSAS again with modification to the local context. I don't know if there could be there might be some value to look at the reason why the 8 of the 49 as of 2021 did not opt to implement IPSAS directly. I mean, they do some modification, perhaps the standards. They need to find the standards really applicable to their situations. And what about the 16 that are intending to use it by 2025 and the 29? So I think it would help the board look at a big wide perspective. If we intend to drive adoption and implementation by 2030, more by, the direct implementation with lesser effort for the public sector, for those public sector entities to modify, it might also help the board decide on which standards to look at. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I mean, I think there's a couple of different factors in play there. Certainly, I think this idea has emerged from this meeting that we should actually do a relatively quick survey of the standard setters using IPSAS in terms of which ones are they drawing on? If they're not drawing on them, why? If they've adapted them, why? And that will give us some very useful feedback. Then there's the second part of it, which I think is quite interesting in this point about our jurisdictions directly adopting or indirectly adopting. And that's where I think a lot of jurisdictions, certainly to begin with, actually have a preference for the indirect route because that gives them a national endorsement process, which gives them the backstop that they can actually amend the standards for the local circumstances. And then I think that's actually where the Philippines experience was very valuable. Because essentially you started off that route and then gained confidence in the use of the standards and allowing a move to direct. And I think it's all part of the same process. But I think if we go for that, let's just start off with, okay, where have you adapted? Why have you done that kind of thing? That will give us some very good contextual information, and then we can refine going forwards. We have a challenge in data collection anyway, in being scientific about it. Frankly, we're in the middle of updating the index at the moment, but it is a really time-consuming task. So we can't be totally scientific about it, but I think we can get some quite good contextual information at least to begin the process, and then all of this can be refined over a period of time. So thanks for that. And I think, that just underlines the importance of that first time getting some data in. Over to Adrian.
Thanks, Chair. At the end of the day, all of the process will rely, and I'm worried with that, on the staff availability and the IPSASB resources. Well, understand me well, I'm not the spokesperson of the staff union, but I believe that we should be concerned about the capacity of the staff to deliver what the IPSAS board is expected from the staff that supports the board. So first thing to consider is that this PIR will very exceptionally, in very exceptional situations, end up in, I mean, amending an IPSAS or parts of an IPSAS, okay? So it's not an IPSAS designing, it ends up in providing additional explanations. So it's more a technical issue than a responsibility of the standard setters. So, and I think that issuing RFI will be very demanding. Now, if you get, well, 30 responses to a request for information, you have to spend a lot of time on that to analyze the answers and provide proposals to yourself or, in those exceptional situations, to the board. So I was thinking, and because it is a user's issue, I was thinking of a possibility to imagine some outsourcing of the analysis of the matters and prepare proposals for a way forward, be it develop additional interpretation or explanations, practical explanations, or make a proposal in view of tabling it at the IPSAS board for a new or amended IPSAS. So at the time we issue our RFI, could we ask the constituents or those who are touched by the RFI, would you volunteer to provide an analysis of the matter and make proposals to the board on how we could move forward in adding explanations? Because it's their own concern. It's a concern of those users of the standards. So let's be creative.
Ross.
So I do want to hear from Edwin on this one for sure. But I think the way you're thinking about it, Hervé Adrien, is an interesting way in how you draft the RFI and what you ask for. So I think we could go down a route where we're very prescriptive in the RFI, that we don't just want people to identify the issues, we want to hear what they think the solutions are as well, and kind of do some of the thinking. Inevitably, it'll still fall on staff to go and think about what they've heard and test that against our understanding of the standards, the framework, how we think about things, and that inevitably will take resources. But then there's another stop-start point. So just because we do an RFI doesn't mean we're going to immediately start a major project to address the issues. We then have to do another project prioritization and decide, is this, I think to Lynn's point earlier, if it's something already on the work program, it's quite easy to try and deal with some of the problems. But if it's a completely off-the-shelf project that you need to start, you need to actually have the capacity in the work program to do it, so it doesn't sit there for a long period of time. But inevitably, if we're at a point where we don't have the time in the work program, there will be a waiting period before the actual standard setting would start if there was an issue of substance to address. So when the board agrees to do the request for information, it's only committing to do the request for information and the analysis, then has to look at what it hears and decide what to do next with that. That's how we've been thinking about it. That's how it's designed. Edwin?
Yeah, so the way I envisioned it was that if the board does decide to start a project, then Ross would have to work that into the work plan somehow. So it wouldn't be the person doing the RFI automatically just work on the project right away. There would still be a lot of consideration and scheduling. Yeah.
I mean, I think, all of this, going back to your point earlier, Adrian, I think, yes, this is something else in the work program, and this is, I think, your point, Edwin, that is going to have to be managed going forwards alongside all of the other things, and that, to an extent, is why we consulted on the strategy and said, actually, look, we're rebalancing this, because the time that gets spent on PIRs and the application panel takes away from the staff time that's available for development of new standards, and that's really why we included that shift. So I think, what this does is it actually really makes real that shift. And that's going to have to be managed within the context of the overall resource. And then the pipeline of future projects going forward, depending on what comes out of that. So I don't think any of us really knows how that's going to work out at the moment, but we have got the approval from our stakeholders that we should start to devote time to this. And similarly, that's gone, we've consulted through the roundtables, CAG input, PIC and so on. So I think we've got the mandate to go and see how this works out in practice. Okay. Any other points then on the process, or shall we just walk through the document itself and pick up final comments then? I think, Claudia, that's from before? Yes, sorry, that was what I interpreted it as, actually, which is why I didn't go to you. Okay, so Edwin, we're at a point where we will walk through. Yeah. Okay. So just to be clear, I think we will pick up points, but then I'm not proposing that this then comes back to the board again in terms of finalisation. I think if everyone's okay, then as it's a board process, what we will then do is staff will make edits to action, and if you're okay, then I will do a final review on behalf of the board, and then we're good to move forward. Okay. So Edwin, move us through then.
Okay, so the
should we just do section by section?
Yeah, I was thinking section by section. So the operating procedures start on page 4 of 11.2.1, which is page 10 if you're looking at the entire PDF package. So I'll start with the preamble, so paragraphs 1 and 2. Any comments for that? Okay, we now move on to, sorry.
Patricia.
Yeah, I think the text should be improved to consider the same approach in the term of reference to consider because I understand that the SRS is in
Sorry,
the
Patricia, do you mind just being a bit closer to the mic? I'm struggling to hear. Sorry.
Today I think I misled. In this paragraph, I think should be the same scope as in the term of reference to consider SRS standards, sustainability reporting standards.
So in paragraph 1, we talk about high quality accounting standards and other publications, and that other publications was meant to address SRS. And then when we talk about the specific accounting standards and I guess other standards, we actually do talk about the IPSAS and IPSAS SRS in paragraph 2. So that was the intention.
Yes, the text is similar to the term of reference, but it's not the same. It's the modification not follow the same changes in the term of reference, considering the new activities related to reporting, sustainability reporting. Thank you.
Okay, so Edwin, if you can just work with Patricia and we'll just get consistency to address that point.
Okay, so next section is on objective, and that's paragraphs 3 and 4.
Andrew.
Thanks. On paragraph 3, B, where we say whether there are questions about specific aspects of applying the requirements, I know we've taken the wording from the ISB's process. It just reads very differently. I mean, there's always going to be questions about our standards. So I wondered whether we shouldn't change that also to divergence. I think also within our suite, we talk more about the divergence of practice that exists and whether there's therefore something that we need to do to try and clarify that. That was 3B. On 3C, again, just the phrasing that we've got there, and we say, are the benefits and costs from applying it different to those that we actually expected? I don't know that we have a reliable enough measure of what we expect the benefits and the costs to actually be to then sort of compare, or that that's the aim of the test. I think the aim of the test is to say, well, when we set the standards, we expect the benefits to exceed the costs, and is that what is actually happening in practice? So it's, do the benefits exceed the costs as originally expected, rather than comparing the benefits and the costs directly.
Edwin, do you want to come back on that? I mean, just on 3B, I'm wondering whether we really want to tie ourselves down quite in the way that you're actually implying, because listening to what you said, I thought it's better to keep it open, because I'm not sure that we're actually going to have the information. So, you know, there's a kind of catch-22 here.
But isn't that the aim of the PIR, is to ask for that information to find out if there is divergence?
But B is actually considering whether there are questions arising about specific aspects of applying the requirements. So shouldn't we just keep it open, is what I'm saying? Because I think there's a danger in trying to be too specific at this stage. And if it's wording that's come from the ISB's equivalent requirements, presumably they've been doing PIRs for a lot longer than us. So therefore, do we need to actually tie it down? And you know, I think that comes into probably there will be a need, and maybe we need to be explicit about that there will be a need to come back and review these processes when we've actually had some experience in adopting them. But I think we just need to be careful about overthinking it at the moment. So my proposal on 3B would be that if that's the wording in the ISB's requirements, that let's just leave it at that at the moment, and then come back in the light of experience, and we can review as necessary at that point in time. Edwin, on 3C.
On 3C, I think I would agree with Andrew that it's really looking at whether the benefits expect the cost and not really a quantitative comparison. So I can work with him to revise the wording for that.
Okay, so work offline with Edwin on that. Camira.
Thanks, Chair. Similar to Andrew's point, I will just remove this as compared to the benefits we expect before. I think it's enough when we say what is currently happening, what are the benefits and costs from implementing that, and that's it. On paragraph 4, I was wondering if we can be a bit more flexible, because as of now it says that we are only allowed to start a project of modifying the existing standards as a result of the public consultation. What would happen if we receive or we get information from informal ways and we start the PIR, but we decide maybe the amendments are not so so challenging just to start a formal consultation, but it could be included in our, for instance, improvements to IPSAS or something, so that I would prefer to stay flexible, because still there will be some publication. If we do improvements to IPSAS, we will publish it, we will receive comments on that. Otherwise, it will be really all the time a very lengthy process. So I think there are changes and changes, so that we stay flexible. Thanks.
Ross, you want to come back?
Yeah, I don't read it that way, that that's the only way we can start a project. I kind of read it the other way around, that it's saying we're doing a PIR, but that doesn't mean it automatically becomes a standard setting project. The board has to decide to do that. But I don't think it's ruling out the alternative that the board could just say, we need to fix IPSAS 20 and we want to start it. So it's not requiring that every new standard that exists has to go through a request for information before you start it. And we can have another look at the wording to make sure that's not happening if you've got something that's leading you down that path, because that's not the intention.
I mean, I wonder whether the simplest thing is actually just to add a footnote, because I can see the point that Camira is making in terms of it could be a separate project, or we do have the option of putting it through the annual improvements. And I think if we just footnote it to just make that explanation, then it addresses that without over sort of elaboration. Because I can see both. I can see both angles to that. So if we just add a footnote on that, Camira. I've got Lucy and then Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. On paragraph 5D, I don't think at
I
the-
think we're still on 3 and 4. Sorry, were you 3D?
sorry,
Isn't it?
sorry.
Yeah, I think you're. We'll come back to you on that when we get to that one. Lynn.
Just linking to the conversation that Camira helpfully started, it occurred to me that once you've approved this PIR process, you also need to reflect its existence in other processes you follow. What came to my mind was the improvements process, where we've had a couple of times where we haven't always been clear on kind of like the rules of the road for an improvement process. Is it just pure, is there a public sector reason to depart from IFRS? We had that sort of debate, I seem to remember, back in December time, I think it was, last year, when we were debating that. So you might want to just look back at things like the improvement process, where you might get feedback from here, and just make sure that this process gets reflected into the other processes that the board has as well, so that you don't lose that and then get to an improvements point and say, oh, there's no reference to bring this in. So I just think there's other processes you now need to reflect this in.
Yeah, we're going to need to do a piece of work on our own due process anyway. So I think we'll log that one then. Thanks for that. Okay. So if there are no other comments, then on 3 and 4, then we'll move on to the next section. And Lucy, you're ready to go on that. If anybody else then wants to come in on paragraphs 5 to 7. Sorry, Claudia, were you in on 3 and 4 then, or? Okay, right. Okay, so Lucy, lead us off. And then I'm just going to go around the table, actually. So I'll go to Patricia, Liang, and then Claudia.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In paragraph 5D, we intend to gather all the emerging issues in the implementation of IPSAS, but I don't think you can get we can get valuable information on the issues if we refer only to the adoption process, because usually the issues would emerge in the implementation process. So I would suggest that we get the issues that arising from both the adoption and implementation process, in relation also to our strategy, where we differentiated the two processes. Adoption is different from implementation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I think you're right. We might want to just replace adoption by implementation, and that might help then, because we've got that similarity wording with adaptation. And again, that just ties it better into our processes. So I think we'll have a look at that wording in that paragraph. Patricia, to you.
Thank you. Paragraph 5G, in the end of the paragraph, consider all whether the adaptation reflects local jurisdiction, practical or political decision. Practical decision normally is related to the cost benefit, and you need to consider cost benefit. Then I think the paragraph could delete the last part of this, because the paragraph, only the last sentence can finish by the IPSASB. I consider the main element here. The other point is paragraph 6. There is the option to extend the period, but is there not the possibility to anticipate because some, for example, IPSAS 45, it improves some requirements. It's not, the entities not, don't start again the implementation of PPNE standards. Maybe some of these consideration, this possibility to raise the questions can indicate the need to anticipate, not to wait for 5 years. I think only to think about this. Thank you.
Yeah, I received some offline comments about paragraph 6 as well. So I think the intention was really could be modified both ways. So it could be an extension or an acceleration. So I'll amend that wording.
Okay, thanks. So go to Liang, then Claudia, then Noyati.
Thanks, Chair. My first point is related to paragraph 5, and it said based on the following factors and A, B, C, D. I suppose this should be A, B, C, or D. So if you meet one criteria, should be scope in. Maybe we can improve the language a bit. And my second point is related to the example we quoted here in 5A. We quoted IPSAS 32. But actually, in my point of view, maybe our focus for the PAR may be more concern, more attention to those more recently ones, but actually 32 is an old standard and has been effective such as for more than 10 years. So maybe in some cases, if people say the application of IPSAS 32 may have some significant application problem. Maybe we will put into the scope, but I suppose for this document, maybe better if we give a more recent standard as an example. And for my third comment, actually, I still have concern that we say in January, PAR is not considered until at least 5 years after the effective date, etc. For me, I still think better we give qualitative criteria rather than specific time frame, even because actually for some standard, in particular those new ones, there may be significant challenge in practice. And if we say only after 5 years after it is effective, I think maybe it is too late. Thank you.
Yeah, so the intention was for us to use 5 years as almost a starting point, and the factors that are listed in paragraph 6 would have moved it both ways. So I think once I fix the wording for the extension and talk about how it could also be accelerated, that would capture your point, I think.
Okay. So Claudia, then Noyati.
Thank you. I have 3 points. One, it's the same as Ling said. We should think about if the example in 5A is the right one. I would choose IPSAS 38, transfer expenses. It's more common in the public sector, service concession arrangements.
I mean, I wonder whether we just remove the reference because we don't need it. So okay. I think we just take the example out on that one.
And then I have paragraph 5. I think we are a little bit over-ambitious to impact the public sector as a whole. We should maybe modify the first sentence at the end, impact public sector financial management. And my third point is regarding paragraph 7. Our PRI includes also our sustainability standards, but in paragraph 7, we have only as key topics mentioned which are related to our accounting standard suite. There's no link at all to sustainability standards.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. So we just need to make sure that the wording makes that clear. Okay, Noyati.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a small comment. It's about the definition of a contentious requirements and significant because based on A, B, C, D. But when we talk about the D, the process consider the issue emerging on how the PRR assess whether that the issues emerging is contentious or significant to be reviewed or to be revised that particular standard. I'm not afraid about if it is on the public sector, specific IPSAS or the aligning of the IFRS, but if it is D, is quite this. Because when we talk about the D, it seems that the level of considering the D issue is in the second level. Instead, the first level is where maybe due to the public sectors and then aligning and public sector specific adaptation, and the D is I think maybe the issues on the ground is more on the implementation wise. It's not about the aligning. It's not about the public sector specific, and how you define that issues is very significant to the PIR to review the standard or to give some sort of proposal of guidance, something.
I mean, what we're trying to do with these is say, look, these are public sector standards. And the question is actually in that initial process, did we actually not adapt sufficiently for the public sector? I think it's just trying to capture that idea at the moment. So there's going to be a variety of factors that could cause people problems in practice. And basically, it's actually just having an idea as to what that might be rather than, Edwin, is it?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So, it's actually sort of saying, well, we do go through our process in setting the standard originally, and it may be that the board at that time didn't actually foresee, certain nuances of the public sector. So none of this is actually tying us down. It's actually just giving us an opportunity to explore factors. Noriati, back on that.
Another thing, yes, I quite agree with Liang and Lin because of the time frame to be reviewed. Each of the IPSAS standard to be reviewed. It might be because we reviewed upon the feedback or upon the RFI we receive. But what if the feedback during that time doesn't touch certain IPSAS, but when the time goes by, maybe the technology, maybe the requirement of the transaction is evolving. Shall we have a kind of time frame if that IPSAS is not we haven't get material feedback on that particular IPSAS, we should review it in terms, let's say, of 5 years in periodic 5 years in
I can say, maybe we have to review the standard in 5 years' time, even though there is no feedback or no significant feedback from the constituent or the users, because sometimes maybe the users always seeing about the complex, give the feedback about the complex transaction, but somehow neglect some other transaction that might be have affected the true and fair view of the standard itself.
Ross.
So this is one way to initiate a project and to review a standard. It doesn't mean we can't update a standard if something comes through any of our processes to say we need to do standard setting immediately. Whether that's through an improvements project or by initiating a project to update a standard. I mean, we've been updating our standards for a long time now without post-implementation reviews. So this is just a new process, again, as I said, a lens to formally set a time frame to go out to constituents and ask if the standards are working in the way designed. Doesn't mean if something is, identified earlier that the board wouldn't go and fix it or must go through a PIR to do that. So I think we've already agreed we're going to change the timeline to say it could go faster than 5 years. So I think that captures it.
And equally, if something comes up after a PIR has been done, then you've still got the application panel as a route in. You've also got the work program consultation. So there's lots of opportunities. This is just actually formalizing this process. So if anything, it gives constituents additional ways in this and the application panel. It's not taken away. So I've got Lucy, Lynn, and then Mike. And then at that point in time, I want to move us on because we've also got to consider the application panel as well. So Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is also on paragraph 6, because here we said that the timing of the PIR will depend on the effective date of a standard. However, in all our standards, we permit earlier applications. So in other words, we don't count the 5-year or more, 5-year period or more from the effective date of the standard. But maybe since we are permitting earlier applications, we may also consider that entities which have applied earlier applications can also, the standards that were applied earlier by public sector entities may also be subject to the PIR, because again, I think we should not be limited here on the effective date of a standard. Thank you.
Ross.
So just to remind the board, we've had a couple of discussions on when we're going to do this in previous meetings. We did go at first with a very strict 5 years. We were told that was probably too ambitious because of translation and when jurisdictions actually adopt the standards. So it should be 5 years or longer. If someone early adopts, that's fantastic. That means by the time we do our post-implementation review, they'll have more information to provide us. But I don't think realistically that many PIRs through that process are going to happen any earlier than 5 years. Because to get good information on a post-implementation review, you need people implementing the standard, and you need more than one implementing the standard. So, for example, our Spanish-speaking constituents, when we approve a new standard, they usually don't have that standard in Spanish to apply until 24 months after this board approves it. So if you move too quickly, you're going to exclude large parts of the world that need to translate the standards, and then you're not going to have any of their experience to take into account. So I think we've got the flexibility there with saying we could go faster, we could go slower, but I would say the sweet spot is going to be 5 years or more if we actually want to get something back from constituents on a new standard. So I just wanted to remind the board that we had that debate and we've gone back and forth. It was one of the topics that the CAG did mention as well. And we've had we've had criticisms of this board when we've approved things in the last couple years where we were too quick on implementation for countries that don't apply the English standards. So I think it's important that we're sensitive to that.
I think we've also just got to be pragmatic. It is going to take quite a lot of work going through this process, and frankly, we've got a lot of standards that we haven't reviewed. So this is we're going to be in catch-up mode for quite a long while to come. So Lynn, and then Mike, and then I am moving us on.
So I've been reflecting on the discussion, and there's 2 points I want to make, one small and perhaps and one larger. The small one is clearly the IASB have a post-implementation review process. We've talked about that a couple of times. Quite often we look at their standards and we find no real public sector reason to depart, and we bring them into our literature. And so in those instances, wouldn't we look to rely on their processes rather than necessarily absolutely have to have a process of our own on some of our standards? And maybe we just need to reflect how we might draw on their processes in ours, to perhaps again thinking about our capacity. If we've assumed there's no public sector reason to depart and we haven't departed and nothing's telling us anything else, why wouldn't we potentially do a PIR light or a look at their process? So I wondered if you wanted to reflect that. My second point now is perhaps a more fundamental one. I was just reflecting on sustainability standards, and yes, we could write these in throughout this document, but we haven't yet approved our first one, and we're here in 2024. If things go with a fair wind, we will approve, or you will approve, your first sustainability reporting standard in 2025, and potentially you're writing a process in 2024 that you're not going to implement before 2030. I suspect with sustainability reporting standards, once you get the feedback next year and once the implementation process will be different to an accounting standard. And I personally don't think you want to wait 5 years. I know the process enables you to bring one forward, but I think that actually the board should write this process for the accounting standards right now and think in 2025, once you've got the feedback on the consultation, once you've got a better view on who might implement the sustainability reporting standard, I think you should reflect after that on what your PIR process should and will be for your sustainability reporting standards. I think it might be different for your first standard because I think there would be a lot of learning from that implementation on that first standard. And I think you might want to do an entirely different process. So I don't personally think, on reflection and hearing the conversation, that you should write this for both standards. I think you should flag and revisit that once you've approved your first SRS.
Ross, I mean, we have had a number of conversations about this. We've gone backwards and forwards. What I would propose is that we write a review clause into this, and then it can take into account sustainability reporting standards, because frankly, what we need to do is just get this process moving. We can spend ages frankly over-engineering it, and the key thing is that we are actually signalling to our constituents that we will review our literature, and the board is going to have to decide how that works and at what stage. Ross?
So I do think I agree with Lynn. We have developed these procedures thinking about our financial reporting standards, and I think we are trying to future-proof it, but I think if we do footnote it to say that we will consider, once we have standards for sustainability, how the process might need to be adapted for sustainability standards. That does give the opening to think about it, because I completely agree. We don't have a standard yet. We don't know what implementation is going to look like. We don't know what the ISSB's post-implementation process is going to be yet, because they don't have a formal process yet. So just a little footnote or something indicating that we intend to use this process, but we might have to adapt it based on how it develops. So it's not a bad signal to our constituents.
So is everyone okay with that way forward?
I think you should reflect on the 5-year period then if you're going to do that, because do you really want to signal now that you're going to wait 5 years after that first standard to do a PIR, and that's what you're in danger of signaling?
Well, I think we just said though we could go further.
Yeah, you might want to really think about that wording then, because I think you're setting it at 5, but you might go earlier or later. But I think I would perhaps argue you might want to set it differently for an SRS.
I think we are really over-engineering this, and, you know, it's frankly a bit late at this point in time to bring something up that's quite that fundamental. You know, we are not going to be starting a review for a number of years yet, and that is your point. But equally, you know, we're trying to legislate for future on all kinds of things here. I'll take Mike's point first.
So thank you, Chair. I totally agree on the, let's say, rebuttable assumption of 5 years. But I think the reason is why we are discussing that is just, it's para 6 and the wording there. In the last line, it said period could be extended. So expanded to 5 years means more. Can we just change extended to adjusted or something like that? That would make clear that we are flexible on that and would totally be fine. Thank you.
Right, so to Lynn's point, I'm going to take a vote at this stage. Either we go with what we've got, or we go with taking sustainability reporting and all the references to that out. So what I want
How would you
is
like me to vote?
from...
Sorry. Oh, thank you.
So what I want is a show of hands for those that wish to take all references to sustainability reporting standards out. And then I want a show of hands for those that are in favour of proceeding with what we've got and with the insertion of a review clause.
So my proposal was that you revisit this and you flag that you will review it. So you take it out temporarily until you've approved and got the feedback next year, i.e. you will do a process now, but you will review that once you've had the feedback, that you flag that this is dependent on that.
Sorry, I'm not sure what the difference is between what I'm proposing. So basically what I'm saying is that at this point in time, the choice is either we go with what we've got with all the editorials that we've just incorporated, or we say, right, okay, this is not going to apply to this process is not going to apply at the moment to sustainability reporting standards. We can finesse how we communicate it, but at this point in time, we need to start to move forward. And I just want a clear view from the board as to, are we potentially applying this to sustainability reporting standards at this stage, or are we coming back later and we write a review clause in that says we will review this process and then consider its applicability or its extension to sustainability reporting standards? Because we've been round this process 2 or 3 times already. So Ross, can you just take us through a vote, and we will just do a vote on whether we restrict it to financial reporting standards at the moment, or whether we go with what we've got.
So for members that agree to narrowing it to just financial reporting, please raise your flag. So just to confirm, narrowing the process that we're looking at today to only relate to financial reporting, and add the review clause that Ian mentioned, that when we have sustainability standards or after we do our first review, we'll go back and look at it. So this would just be taking out the reference to sustainability in the current document. So I'll say one more time, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. This proposal is to narrow the current document you're looking at to remove the references to sustainability. So applies to financial reporting standards only.
Right, so can we have a show of hands then for those that support?
I've got 9 right now.
Right, so for the record, can I have a show of hands in terms of those that support moving forward on the basis of what we've got?
So we have 9.
Right, let's break for coffee. 20 minutes and then we come back. And I would ask members to discuss this amongst themselves because we do need to approve a process and we just need to get this started. So can you please, over coffee, have some relevant discussions and then come back? And can we please have a clear decision on this? Okay, so as in so many cases, a strategic break may have helped in terms of providing the way forward. Scott, your flag is up, so perhaps if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, I had some conversations during our break, and I'd like to propose that we move forward with it as drafted, but adding review clause, and that review clause would deal with the sustainability, and particularly maybe even put a time frame on it before the 5 years, such as a 3-year period of time we visit that. So I think what I heard around the table, that would probably address the concerns on that, because it gives us, it puts on note that we don't know how this is going to operate on sustainability, and gives us a time frame in which to visit it within.
Renee?
Yes, thank you. I just want to support Scott's proposal. I think it's riskier to remove it completely from a reputational perspective and credibility than it is to leave it in. I think we want both. We want to signal that this process applies to all of our literature, but taking the point that for this one, it's very early days and there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think that's the best approach.
Okay, thanks for that support there. Abdullah, you want to come in?
Yeah, just to support the idea, because we had this discussion with one of the members and they alluded to expected comment that we will get from constituents saying, what about SRS? So just to have it there and add a clause would just do it. Yeah.
Okay. So just for the record, can I just take a show of hands to see if we support Scott's proposal there? Yeah, flags rather, sorry, than hands.
Like to confirm, it's to retain as a sustainability report.
So the proposal is that and this is an internal process. The process goes forward subject to the drafting amendments with a review clause for 3 years that says that we will review the process at that point in time, specifically with developing experience in mind and with sustainability reporting standards specifically to be considered. So this is raise your flags if you support that.
So I've got 13 for supporting Scott's proposal.
Okay. Those against?
I've got 5 against, so we go with Scott's proposal.
Okay, so we move forward on the basis of Scott's proposal then. Okay, mindful of time, if there are any other editorial comments, please can you pass those through to Edwin, and then we will finalise the document through an editorial process in the normal way. Okay, and then we will have a report back in March from staff in terms of proposed way forward on implementation in terms of a pilot. So with that, we move into discussion of the IPSASB application panel.
Thanks, Ian. And before I talk about the timeline, I'll open the floor up for Fabienne to summarize the CAG comments, because we did talk about this on Monday as well. So Fabienne, please.
Thank you, Edwin. Yes, a couple of key comments here from the CAG members that I found particularly to the point. First, CAG members advised the IPSASB on the need to communicate outputs from the panel from the panel to constituents in a transparent manner, including a comprehensive display of how the panel and the IPSASB would respond to constituents' requests. And second, some CAC members noted that the operation of the panel is expected to be a time and resource intensive undertaking. So the IPSASB may want to reconsider the proposed size of the panel and the involvement of specialists, depending on the topics discussed. Hopefully helpful comments here for the IPSASB to consider. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabienne.
Okay. So before we do the page flip, I'll just quickly go through the proposed rollout. So similar to PIRs, we are planning to finalize the operating procedures at this meeting. And for March, we will plan to finalize the membership of the panel. And then in June, we will plan to have a formal rollout where we will update our constituents and essentially have a press release and add the submission page to our website. And then going forward, we can't really schedule or plan for issues coming in because it will really depend on issues raised by constituents. So that's why the timeline is in flux right now. We're essentially just saying we're having it operational starting in June, and then we'll see what happens as constituent comments come in. Okay, so I'll pause there for comments on the timeline for the application panel. Okay.
Anybody wants to impulse on that? Okay. Okay, so the next part is a page flip of the terms or the operating procedures for the panel, and that starts on page 3 of the agenda paper or page 16 if you're looking at the PDF package. So again, what we'll do is we'll just take it section by section. So take any comments on the preamble in paragraphs 1 and 2. Andrew.
Thanks. It's around the inclusion of the sustainability standards within the application panel. The size of the panel is only 4 to 6 members, and I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to get individuals that have got the sufficient skills both in the financial reporting space and the sustainability space, given that size, to sit on this and have the necessary expertise to do this. I just wondered then if we should exclude the SRO standards or consider the role of the Sustainable Implementation Forum, for example, in this sort of space, particularly in the next couple of years.
Edwin, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, so when we originally proposed the panel back in 2023, it was IPSAS only. And the decision back then was that we should rename the panel IPSASB application panel so it applies to both. So to take it out now will be going back on a board decision. So I would recommend that we leave it as is.
I mean, there's 2 ways through on this, aren't there? Because you know, I think going back to the conversation that we had before break, actually, you know, sustainability reporting is in its very early stages. We don't know which way it's going to move forward. So actually, that probably argues for actually the application panel taking those questions, because they're quite likely to be a number of questions that come in. So, you know, the other way through is actually that we just enlarge the number of members slightly, which actually gives us some more flexibility in terms of being able to, you know, address issues as they come in. So, you know, I think that might be a way forward on that. Renee?
Yes, I just maybe want to suggest another alternative. Could the application panel reach out to some of our other groups, the SRG or the climate working group if it's a question on climate, on our climate disclosure standards. So acknowledging that they have the flexibility, the possibility to reach out in our ecosystem elsewhere.
I mean, you certainly make a good point in terms of the sustainability implementation forum is intended to be a way of actually collecting comments in, and that may well be quite a good method of actually channeling comments into the application panel if there's a discussion in the forum which indicates there's a problem that needs further consideration. So I think that's, we need to reflect on the fact there's a number of different ways in which comments could come in, but specifically on sustainability, I think, we just, if we go forward with this, then we need to reflect on that as a mechanism for getting comments in. David?
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is quite the right place to raise it, so tell me to shut up if it isn't. But I mean, I like Andrew, I don't think 4 to 6 is enough, but I was thinking of it more just in terms of IPSAS as they are. So I was thinking you'd need to increase the numbers, maybe 6 to 8 or something like that. But I also was thinking, and this sort of picks up a bit on Renee's point, that I mean, how permanent a membership are you talking about? I mean, my view would be that you need a core membership, maybe of 3, which is always there. But then depending on what items come into the panel, you might want to reach out to other experts across jurisdictions around the world and ask them to be part of an application panel for a specific topic. And we've got between us, not just the IPSASB, but between members, we've got sufficient networks, I would suggest, that we would be able to draw on expertise. And also, if you look at it from through another lens, you're actually helping to develop perhaps future members for the CAG, future members for the board by involving them in this process, which would give us quite a lot of flexibility in, as I say, reaching out for expertise, but actually would help to relieve one of the concerns that the CAG raised about pressure on member TA and staff time.
Adrian.
As I understand paragraph 19, there's a strong connection between the IAP and the IPSAS board. So IAP, in a way, reports to the IPSAS board because IAP provides its comments and recommendation to the IPSAS board as an agenda item, okay? But IAP also provides input to the PIR. So, and when providing input to the PIR, this is outside the IPSASB meetings. It's on the staff to process that input. So we could probably connect better the IAP procedure and the PIR procedure by referring to that responsibility to provide input, which is, which is provided for in the PIR procedure, but not reflected in the IAP procedure. So just a note that IAP could have a role, an important role in providing input to the PIR. And this is outside the IPSASB agenda or whatever meetings.
I mean, I think as we've discussed, this is a way of actually getting, providing a channel to constituents that are encountering problems with our literature. And so, we know that we're likely to get quite a lot of questions and discussions around sustainability reporting. So it seems entirely wrong, having consulted on establishing the panel, that we then say, well, actually, then we're not going to allow people to raise questions on the operations of our of our literature. And certainly I think we're going to need to be able to respond to questions and concerns as they come in. So I think, it's relatively, it would be relatively easy just to say, insert the word core in front of that it will be a core membership of between 4 to 6 individuals. And then you also have the power to supplement as necessary. And therefore, clearly what you would want to do, for example, if you get questions in on a particular, say it's something around the operation of leases, then you would want somebody who has specific leasing expertise, maybe. If it's on a particular sustainability issue, then we might want to draw in somebody who has experience of application at the national standards level, or indeed actually a colleague from ISB, ISSB or whoever. So again, I think this is one of these things where actually we need to allow ourselves the flexibility, and then probably we also need to actually insert a review clause for these operating procedures, because they are just operating procedures. It's a guideline. So I think, to address Andrew's point, I think let's allow ourselves some flexibility. Let's put a review clause in. But it does not seem to send the right message at this point in time that we're going to deny this mechanism to questions raised on what could be various aspects of our literature. So I've got Angela online, Lynn's come in, and then Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to first of all say how much I support the idea of an application panel. I think if I look from an external constituent perspective, I think the best news of this story is the ability for constituents to feed in issues, application issues. That's very powerful. It's really adds to our connection to constituents, and it's a very valuable, rich source of intel. One of the things that in paragraph 4, it's not a drafting issue I'm raising, it's very clear in the operating procedures that this is like a project task force. And we're making it very clear that this is not the equivalent of the ISB's IFRIC, which makes agenda decisions that are effectively binding. I think it's really critical. It's more that expectation and that constituent communication. So when we go out with a press release, I was thinking, and I'm sure the staff are already thinking, that really the emphasis should be on the channel and the fact that there is a channel, and that if you provide information to that channel, these operating procedures to me are suggesting that we're going to commit to at least consider it, and we're going to put resource aside, or we're going to put experts aside. That does lead me to flexibility is probably more key in this document than the other one, and in some ways I feel, because getting that clarity that this is not the equivalent of the IFRIC, and that this is really an extension of a project. And in that sense, we don't normally go out with a press release when we create a task force. And we don't usually communicate in a lot of detail if we feel we need an expert to pull in. So I think my point's more around the communication and the setting the really clear expectation with constituents. And again, I think the timing is ideal ahead of our forum in September. So again, we can reinforce that. So I think in some ways, some of the drafting questions or some of the drafting may sort of reflect the setting of expectations. So I didn't have any specific suggestions, but I guess my main question is, have I understood that correctly, Edwin? Because the papers are very good and it's very clear on that point. But if you're a constituent and you're busy and they've set up something called implementation or IAP, and it's got membership and it's going to have this kind of expertise and it's going to cover this, I wonder if people will just automatically assume it's the equivalent of IFRIC.
I think you're right in terms of communication, Angela. Certainly when we launch it, we will need to be very clear that it is not decision making, and in the way that it's presented on the website, it will also need to be very clear that this is a communication channel. It is not a decision making forum, and there will be no IPSASB, IFRICs or anything like that. And I think we did make that clear in the way in which we consulted on it. So we just need to follow through on that. So I think we leave that as an instruction to staff. Lynn, then Andrew.
So I did agree with Andrew's comments and also David in terms of the size of the panel. I hear the answer around, okay, well, we need to be flexible and we will be flexible in how we do things. But when I look at the drafting in terms of the operating procedures, I suspect there's a few places where we do really need to inject that flexibility. I was really struck when we had April Mackenzie come to present to us on their experiences of implementing sustainability and the different types of expertise that you needed. And so I think that we need to add that in quite a few places in the drafting. But I'll give you a for example on issue identification. This sort of, adding a catch-all type of anyone can raise issues isn't there, and people might read this code thinking I'm on the Sustainability Implementation Forum and I don't have a mechanism to access this. So I think we need some more flexibility in the drafting. And similarly, when it talks about how the analysis should be performed, we're putting a lot of emphasis on staff, but we need to reflect sort of their ability to co-opt in expertise and even to consult with people who, I don't know if it's on measurement, you might want to consult with David Watkins, even when he's not around the board table anymore, in terms of what was intended at the time. So I think that flexibility needs to be built into the drafting. My final observation, I think, and it comes right back to, I guess, Andrew's point on the numbers on the panel, but perhaps in a different way, is you're asking volunteer board members to do this, and depending on the workload, that's potentially a lot of additional time. So actually having a few more board members that are able to form part of the panel might reduce the burden, or you have to manage expectations about what it's going to be able to consider in practice when it's formed. And maybe that's a communication point. But this is a burden, a burden on people's time, and you need to manage that expectation.
Thanks, Lynn. So I think if there are suggestions, specific suggestions in terms of making sure that the drafting reflects that flexibility, that would be helpful to have those. I think, we're going to have to manage this in terms of, so the proposal is that it has a core membership, and then there is already provision in there for drawing in specific expertise of whatever nature. So again, we just need to ensure that that flexibility is written into this. Andrew.
Thanks. Just reflecting on the suggestions and the discussions. So I can understand the need and the ability that the flexibility gives us. I think I have just a few concerns, not to rule it out completely, but I think just in terms of the extent of it, and having 3 or 4 core members may become a problem in that if you talk to IFRS Foundation staff, for example, when a new member does join one of their various committees, there is a learning curve as to what do we decide, what's our mandate, what is the guidance we actually put out there. And I think if you've kind of got this in and out of experts coming in and out of the panel, you may spend more time debating kind of what's the terms of reference, what's the guidance, what's the limitations of the panel, how does it function, rather than discussing the issue itself. So I don't want to rule out experts, but I don't think it should be a 3 or 4 core members. It should be a majority of core members, or significantly all core members, with fewer experts coming in to assist the panel in that side. The other question or concern that I have around this is, or why also support, sorry, a more permanent and significantly permanent membership is that I think if you look at the IFRIC when they started, it was also not supposed to be authoritative guidance. That was what was communicated, that was always the intention, but that's not what happened in practice. And I have a significant concern that we're going to end up in the same space. So as much as we communicate this is not the IFRIC, there are no agenda decisions. It's not authoritative guidance. I think whatever this panel does decide and ultimately recommend through to the board is publicly available. And we may find that practice actually develops, that people do start using this as authoritative guidance. I'm not suggesting we change our communication around this. I'm comfortable with that, but I think it's more around the governance of the panel and the membership of the panel to ensure that we've got safety in that what is discussed and recommended to the board is then appropriate, and we don't expose ourselves to risk there.
I mean, to go back to that point, the original proposal from staff, and this has been walked back, is that precisely to address the point about not issuing interpretations and nobody being clear about, and that not being clear. Originally, the intention was not to publish anything in terms of decisions. And then I would draw the board's point of view to actually then somebody said, well, actually, no, we need some transparency around this. We need some communication on it. So I think we have been entirely clear all the way through that this would not be an IFRIC. I think we can be very clear on the website that this is not an IFRIC. And I don't think we can go a lot further than that. And actually, frankly, the more that we actually build in formality around governance, the more it starts to look like IFRIC. So I think, on this, we have actually debated this quite a lot already. And I would suggest that actually what we need to do is actually go forward and actually operate with a core membership. If the panel decides that there are problems that are emerging as a result of its operation, then it can refer that back to the board, and the board can reopen these procedures in order to address the problems that are emerging. But frankly, we could spend a lot of time actually tilting, frankly, just trying to seal off all kinds of things that actually are not going to emerge in practice, or may emerge in practice, but in a different way. And we just need to get this up and running. And as you said, the experience was with IFRIC that they anticipated it working in a certain way, and it ended up working in a different way, providing we go into it with this is just a way of getting issues looked at and filtered. It is non-authoritative, and we spell that out clearly in all the communication. Then I think we just need to let it work, and then we can respond to it in practice. I mean, I really think at this stage, the important thing is having committed to getting it up and running, that we get it up and running and don't over-engineer it. So I think, where we get to on this is we should emphasize this is a core membership of 4 to 6. We should emphasize that there is flexibility to draw in other expertise depending on the topic matter. And then I think we should be clear that there's a default review point, but that it can be reviewed earlier by the board if the panel decides that it needs to operate in a different way. So if that's okay, we'll move forward on that basis. So can we just go back in and start to pick up and here, this will go through an editorial process. So what I'm not looking for is edits. I'm looking for points of principle here as we walk through the rest of this. So can I move us on to paragraphs 3 and 4? Lucifer, you're on paragraphs 3 and 4.
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Actually, this is also related to the selection of the core members of the panel. And it says here in paragraph 4, it will work like a task force. But if you look at how can we then ensure that we eliminate those issues where the onboarding of new members of the task of the panel, so that we can have some institutional memory for those who would be left in the panel, rather than everybody would be onboarded at the same time. So in other words, if maybe the term of the core members of the panel, because it says here that they can be current members of the IPSAS board or those who would be reappointed. So just to ensure that we are not we remove those problems where there should be orientation or education by those who are on incoming to the panel. So I think that has to be considered, so that those who would be going out of the panel as resulting from the end of their term in the board, I think that should also be taken into consideration. Perhaps we should consider the term of the end of term of the incumbent members of the core, and before that term ends, then there should already be new members who would be included in the panel, so they have still enough time to understand the workings of the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Ross, back on that.
I think we can make a couple of small edits to pick up your point. So the important point on institutional management of the change actually sits with the staff team. Doesn't sit with the membership. So we'll be the ones onboarding and making sure transition works. So we can add something for that. And we'll also put a point on transition in there and think about it. But take your point.
I mean, also there is flexibility in any case in terms of a reason for keeping on somebody after they step down from membership would because actually they fall into one of the other categories. So I think, you know, as you say, Ross, if you can tweak the wording, but then basically what we're looking for at any one point in time is that you have the right representation, you have the right cross-section of skills. Over Adrian.
Just one small comment and suggestion. Given the possible involvement implication in the standards that would be under review for application, I would suggest that the chair be selected from current and past IPSASB members. Could make sense. I mean, not for me. I have no intention to be the IP chair, so not talking for myself.
I mean, it's a good point in terms of, I think probably in discussions with staff, there had always been an assumption that it would be a current board member who chaired the panel, because that provides the connection from the board's point of view with, you know, current discussions and so on. So I think if members are okay, I think we should make that clarification that it would be, you know, chaired by a current board member for that reason. Lynn.
I was just reflecting on the conversation about the need to make this clear that this is non-authoritative. And I was then thinking about its name, and I wondered about whether or not it's helpful to add the word advisory to the name, application advisory panel, or is panel the bit that's making it feel like it could potentially be authoritative? If it's more like a task force, the application task force, I just wonder about its name, but maybe add advisory to it that you would help from the outset in terms of the communications.
So Probably before I was a standard setter, I would have thought we spend a lot of times thinking about labels when it's not important, but the labels matter. So I think from our perspective, it's a task force and it's going to help the board do its work. And it's a task force with a specific focus on maintaining the standards and giving our constituents a way to feed in and work through it. So I don't see a problem with branding it a task force. I don't think, again, it's going to do what a task force does. We've called it in our communication strategy and implementation panel. So if we want to just clarify in the terms of reference really clearly, I don't see a problem, but I'm seeing as I'm speaking, people putting up their flags. So I'm guessing people don't agree with me.
I mean, you know, I think calling it advisory probably actually starts to create that problem in terms of the nature of what it's doing. Probably what I'd suggest is we have an academic advisory group. I think if we just call it the IPSASB application group and go with that and see if we get problems, then let's deal with them as they arise. But I think, you know, potentially we can over-engineer this. Renee and then Noyati.
Yes, thank you. So just my reaction to task force is that I find a task force as a temporary connotation, right? Task forces are stricken for a particular reason and they have usually a limited life. So that's why task force then doesn't resonate with me. Group is an option. So
Noyati.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to clarify panel versus task force as well. If it is the way we conduct it, just like task force, is it we arrange that panels is not a panel. This is more than one panels because of you know, it focus on certain issues or certain standard, or do we need to have a panel which is have a core and then the issues is according to the mean that panel is overseeing all the issues and then recommend to the IPSAS board, or the panels will look into the issue according to the standards and then recommend to the IPSAS board. Which one?
So I think bearing in mind that this is causing confusion even amongst the board, let's just call it the IPSASB application group. Then that has, you know, nobody has any problems with the academic advisory group. And I think if we see problems emerging in practice with the perception that people attach to it, then we could call it something different at that point in time. But, you know, we always get hung up on labels. So, you know, let's just call it the application group and let's go with that and see if we get problems in practice. Okay. Right. So let's then move on. I think we've sort of aired the questions around panel membership. Claudia, and just to stress, I'm looking for comments on matters of principle. I'm not looking for drafting points at this stage. Claudia.
Maybe it's mixed. I want to really support or suggest that in point 5, we make clear that the panel is only dealing with technical issues. Now it's drafted like it will focus on technical issues. That leaves the idea open, then will be do more.
Okay, thanks for that. Right. Then frequency of meetings and issue identification. Patricia.
I think 2 questions. Not question, but I think suggestion. I think it's important to centralize the one to receive. and if possible, to have some kind of classification about IPSAS or some more to facilitate the work of the panel. And this is a practical issue, and but it's related to the another point is about transparency and how to this this submission by the constituent will be available in some way or not. For example, when I have a consultation, I have the response letter available for all that are interested in this. It is you thought about this. What is your thought about this?
Yeah, so the thought is that we wouldn't post the questions or the query verbatim, but we would anonymize it to make sure that you can't identify who sent in the question, and that would be posted on our website. So it is public. Yeah.
I mean, we have been around this before. There is a very fine line to take on this because originally the proposal was that we would not publish details, then members wanted details published, and then we've got to avoid the point that actually then it becomes like IFRIC in terms of agenda decisions and so on. So, you know, we've got a very fine line to draw here between an issue has been raised and, you know, how we describe that, precisely to avoid the point that these things become authoritative if you're not careful. Is this just we need to clarify drafting? Okay, so if you can bring your drafting point back offline, then we'll do. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 9, it's identify the mechanism by which to capture the issues, application issues. And in letter B, by a member of the IPSASB or the IPSASB's consultative advisory group. What about issues that may emerge about sustainability? Would the sustainability reference group, how are issues that may be identified by the sustainability reference group be brought to the attention of the application group? Thank you.
Yeah, we can certainly add that in.
Right, I think we've come to an end on this one. Clearly, there are a number of editorials that need to be taken into account. What I would suggest is that staff actually circulate an updated version. Members can add any final comments to that, and then it will go through the formal editorial process. You know, and then we can actually get moving with this. I think we will insert a review clause into it, precisely because members have picked up all kinds of concerns. And I think we basically need to actually operate this, and then we will come back and review it. And the nature of that review clause should also include the fact that if there's a request from the application panel for discussion about potential changes, that can be brought earlier. And I think we've got all the flexibility that we actually need. Okay. So I think with that, we're through that. So Ross, can you then take us into the item 12 on terms of reference update?
Thank you. Just one moment to get the slides up. So the terms of reference, I'll give you a quick background on it, but My slides are up, so we'll get right into it because we are up against time with the early end of today. So I'll run through the points on here and why we're doing the terms of reference update. And before we get into it, just highlight that the terms of reference are owned by IFAC. And IFAC has them for all of its committees and boards that sit underneath IFAC. We are an independent board. IFAC doesn't meddle in what we do, but legally they do control our terms of reference. And we do need to update those terms of reference for a couple of housekeeping points that are in the paper in detail. So the main one being the top bullet on this slide that we talked about earlier this week, the independent search committee has been established to appoint the chair. Current terms of reference say the nominating committee makes the recommendation. So to be consistent with the process and to make sure when IFAC is ready to appoint the next chair, it needs to update terms of reference for that fact. So while opening that up and going through the process, so discussions with the PIC, sharing with the board, IFAC doing its review and approval process in its formal meetings, there are a couple other items it's picking up at the same time. The fact that we're going to have sustainability reporting standards should be referred to in our terms of reference. That's one of the updates. IFAC's bylaws change over time. Some of the bylaws have been tweaked, nothing substantive. Those need to be reflected in terms of reference. You heard about it with Joao from the handbook, and you've seen it in our documents. IFAC's trying to better protect its intellectual property. IPSASB's standards are IFAC's intellectual property. It's got new trademark guidelines and how it talks about the standards and refers to them. Again, to protect IP, those are the other updates included. So we wanted to give the board a heads up that these are the proposed changes that IFAC has been shared with the PIC and will be taking forward. If there are any edits that anybody wants me to take to the IFAC team and work through, I'm more than happy to collect those and do so. So the main purpose of this session is just to give you the information to let you know this is coming. So you're not surprised when you see our terms of reference changed on the website. This board is not responsible for writing the terms of reference, but if you do have edits you want to share with me, please pass them along. Claudia's very helpfully sent some along to me and Dave. We'll happily go and discuss that with the IFAC staff that'll take them through, but they've got their own review process and their own approval process to take these through. And the last point I want to make is this is Dave's session. Dave was meant to lead this session. He did the work. I'm only presenting on his behalf. He's done all the hard work working with IFAC. He's done all the heavy lifting. I don't want to be taking credit for his work, so I'm just making that point. Working on terms of reference can be a tedious, difficult process. It gets very legalistic, and it's challenging when they're not yours to write, since we all have opinions on how we should make things. But the legal team at IFAC will look at things to make sure it's all good. So the only point I'm looking for here is if there's any substantive points that people want to raise, and you can send me your edits offline, and we'll make sure we take those into account.
Okay, thanks, Ross. And yeah, thank you very much to Dave for doing the heavy lifting on that. It's unfortunate that he wasn't able to travel to be with us at this meeting. So any substantive comments that anybody wants to raise on what we've got? Mike.
So thank you, Chair. I just want to add another issue. When I ran, especially through that objectives section, it's really hard to align that to what is in our work plan, because positively say you can, okay, there's no obvious contradiction, but on the other side, there are certain things mixed up in the, let's say, in the balance of our tasks. This is really brought another way out in our work plan document. There are certain other things issued on here, statistics, and the other one not. On the website is different, and therefore my proposal would be on that two objectives row to align that as far as possible, because at the moment it's too much mixed and not outbalanced. Thank you.
So, Mike, if you send me and Dave your proposals, we'll look at it. And just be clear, these are terms of reference. It's not our strategy. So it's just the legal terms of reference that go on the website. They don't have to be fully aligned. But if you send us what you want, what you're thinking, we can look and we can work with IFAC staff to see the level we can align them.
Mike, back on that.
Just shortly such about the objective of our of our board, which is a very, let's say, important section, and I think it's worth to align that as far as possible to avoid confusion. Thank you.
Send them through. We'll have a look.
Okay. Any other points anybody wants to raise? Lynn.
It was only a minor point, but I noticed it refers in a couple of places to amendments that have been made in order to ensure alignment with IFAC bylaws. I just wanted, I guess, confirmation from you, Ross. Are we fully compliant with IFAC bylaws? I guess I hadn't really thought to myself how those related to the operation of this board. So I guess I was asked after some positive confirmation, are you able to confirm that we do comply with IFAC bylaws? I hadn't realised necessarily that they'd applied to this board.
Yeah, again, because we're a legal entity of IFAC, they've got pretty strict bylaws in how these committees, boards can be set up. I would argue even before these changes, we're, with all points of principle, we're aligned with IFAC's bylaws, but there has been shift in some of the wording, they're just trying to better align it with the bylaws. So it's kind of a cleanup. If we weren't going through this process, I don't believe we would spend the time to try and fully align. But Linda Lack, who's leading this at IFAC, felt there were a few areas where we could be more clear on how we align with the bylaws. So she thought it was a good time to make those changes. So to answer you in principle, we're fully in line with IFAC's bylaws. This is just to clean it up and make sure we're to the letter of the law aligned.
Okay, thanks, Ross. I think that's very helpful to have that assurance. Okay, so I think that's helpful. So as per the request, if there are any suggested edits, pass those through to Ross. And yeah, I think that.
Yeah, no other points other than the plan is to wrap this up well in advance of June, when would be the earliest that the search committee will be appointing or recommending the candidate to be the next chair. So this is the timeline we're working towards in the paper. Nothing to discuss here. And if there are any surprises that come through the process, we'll share those with the board as soon as available to make sure you're aware of the development of this. Thanks.
Okay, so I think that moves us back into the final item on the agenda, which is Programme and Technical Director's report on the work programme.
This one's me as well, so just wait for my quick slides. And then we'll take you through those and take any final questions on the work programme. So those who went on the weekend trips might recommend this or might recognize this picture because it was taken at the King Khaled Reserve on Saturday. So I thought I'd try and get some local content into the background pictures. So as per normal, reflecting items in progress in the work program. In terms of approvals, a lighter meeting than the last two, but we did have an approval nonetheless. Good job, Tylene, for getting the IFRIC alignment approval amendments completed. So I just wanted to say good job. But I was told we can't just use the thumb, so I found a badge of honor that we'll be using this time. And then updates to the work program. As discussed, we're adding the work program consultation. It's not currently reflected on the work program, but I'll be adding that in with the September approval. So that's the one change I'll be making. And just a reminder, we haven't scheduled a check-in meeting for February. We don't think it's needed. However, the March meeting and the April check-in will be a pretty heavy meeting, so just flagging that in advance. Staff will be very busy getting ready for March, and the check-in meeting, I think, will be one of the heaviest check-in meetings we've probably had in a couple of years as we look at the responses to the two major items out for consultation. And the last point I wanted to note from my report, and happy to take any questions, was just around staffing. So many members know that Celine is going on maternity leave. She didn't come to this meeting because she's very close to welcoming the new family member and didn't think it was a good idea to travel. So we will be losing Celine for up to 18 months for her maternity leave. We're sad to see her go, but we're wishing her all the best in her coming birth of her second child, and happily welcome her back in 2026. And from that perspective, obviously we lost Anthony at the end of September, and Christoph will be departing the team at the end of the year. We also had John settle into full retirement in July. So that's been quite a bit of movement in the staff compared to normal. But there are two specific updates on staff I wanted to provide as well in terms of incoming staff. So I did mention earlier in the week that we've hired our World Bank consultant who'll be joining us on a close to full-time basis. He's already working with us, but he'll be working on a close to full-time basis from January. That's Alex Metcalf, who many of you have seen. He's been at Standard Setter Forums in the past. If you do any work with ACCA, he's been leading their public sector group for the last 4 or 5 years. And he's just finishing off a project with ACCA now to implement their sustainability reporting. So he brings a lot of expertise and credibility to that position, and we're very happy to have someone of Alex's quality joining us. And in addition to our staff, but maybe not in addition to everyone around the table, we have hired a new principal who will be joining us in January. Very happy to welcome Saya Barton to join us on the IPSASB team. And as I said, unfortunately, she won't be Renee's TA any longer. And Renee very graciously supports this move, but it is, Renee will have a learning curve with her new TA when that's appointed at the time. But sorry, Renee, your loss is our gain. But we're very happy to welcome Saya to the team in January. She's been very engaged already. She's still in the transition phase from her current role, and she's very excited to join the team, and we're very excited to have her join the team. So that's the headline staff updates that I just wanted to share with the board as we complete the PTD report.
Renee, to you.
Yes, I'm just very excited for her as well. She's going to be a great addition to the team, and I just want to be on the record that the staff will owe me one.
Thanks, Renee. Lynn.
Ross, just in terms of your technical director's report on the work programme, will you now update that for the application panel and the post-implementation reviews? At the moment, you've only got activities in at December, you haven't, but whereas the papers did outline activities through 2025, is it your intention, I think in terms of the public version, that does need to be updated now to reflect those activities?
Yes, exactly. So the process after we get to the Friday of the board and board makes all its decisions, I update the work program to reflect all of the changes agreed. So we've gone through those papers now. The board's agreed the timeline, so I'll now reflect that on the work program. You're right, I should have put that on the slide where I showed the changes to the work program. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the update on staffing, Ross. I was just, could you remind me or perhaps tell us how long Alex Metcalf is expected to, you said full-time from January. I understand that's a time-limited funding role. How long do you expect that role to continue?
So we have funding to support a consultant for approximately 2 years, plus or minus, depending on the extent we use them. So we have an agreement with Alex now. It's not a 2-year contract. It's not appropriate to go that long when you're using an initial contract with World Bank. If Alex works out in the role and we find it's mutually beneficial, there is the chance to extend it. And, hopefully that's the route we go, but we have to follow the agreement. But the funding is substantial for probably a little more than 2 years based on our current budget. So definitely to support us through the next phase of the project, as well as some of the implementation rollout we're expecting.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Ross. Any other points on the work programme? Okay, great. Well, I think that more or less gets us to the end of the formal agenda. I think it wouldn't be right to finish, though, without going back to our hosts, Abdullah and his team, who have just done an absolutely fantastic job in terms of supporting us through this meeting. It's always challenging in terms of doing a meeting away from home base, and you know, I think they've been absolutely fantastic hosts, exceptional hosts. So I think, you know, we should just you know, give them a round of applause for absolutely everything. It almost seems insufficient, but yeah, I think just formal recognition. And of course, they've also worked extremely well with Leah. You know, it's tough on Leah as well. So I just want to sort of remind everybody that it's a team effort on both sides. But Abdullah, to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to everyone to be here to make this successful. We've been working on this for about a year now, and just a couple of thanks, if you allow me. Just I want to thank Rahat for putting up with me. It's been an addition to her daily job. Actually, it's like being just following up with me, just standing on my door, even in the meeting rooms, just waiting for me to come out, just to share with me some of the information, getting everything around for the board wouldn't have happened without the exceptional support from Leah, Ras, and all the team. But yeah, we had to reach out to several government entities here to make everything possible, and everybody here was really excited to have you. And well, just to recall one conversation I had with Ragad, and this was 3 months ago, and I say, I'm waiting. I'm already on a Friday, the last day of the board meeting, just to give you a big thank. And here we go. It's been lovely to have you. We enjoyed it. It's been an addition with all of my team been engaging around, and not just on the term of my team, even for the leaders of Ministry of Finance to see the level of discussion that we are having here. And yeah, just thank you all. And also we have from our communication team, Muayyad is here. He's, if you've seen him Sunday, he was at the forum. I came back from the phone. I found him. He was already in here, just testing the mics and making sure that everything is going right. And he has his even family issues, yet he still managed to be here and to support all of us. And not in a single event he missed out, him and Ragad. We also have a team that is working on the background. We have a support team, a war room, and this wouldn't have happened without them. I want to conclude with the thanks to His Excellency Abdulaziz Al Frayah, because when we started this, he said, let's form a steering committee. This cannot be successful without having everybody involved. And for His Excellency Hamad Al Kanhal for support, for being here, and he's been enjoying all these conversations that we had, and he was trying to plan something for today, but unfortunately they are into that phase of year-end closing. So yeah, so here we go. Thank you for coming, and for those who are traveling back, safe travels. For those who are traveling either to Al Ula or going to Mecca, hope you enjoy the time there. Thank you.
So thank you once again, Abdullah and the team, for all the work that's gone in. I think reflecting on the meeting, actually, whilst it has been a very different meeting to the September meeting, actually, we put in place a lot of very important foundations for moving forward. When you think about the discussions that we've had on presentation of financial statements, on sustainability reporting, and on maintenance activities, just to name a few. And those will really shape our work going through the rest of the year. And coming right back to the start, I think it is an important year for the board as we start to prepare for the chair transition. So all of that wraps in together, and it will work towards a very important check-in with our constituents in terms of the Public Sector Standard Setters Forum. So that sets the stage for the coming meetings during 2025. But for now, I think thank you very much, everyone. Congratulations to the staff. Thank you to the board and the technical advisors for all the preparation, which has enabled us to have some very good conversations here. And all the best over the New Year period, festive season, and look forward to seeing everybody back again when we convene in Washington, DC in March. So thank you very much, everyone. One final comment, lunch will be available from 11:45 in the normal place. The board in-camera session will start at 12:30 back here. So thank you very much, everyone.
Lunch will be 11.